All right. So I just heard recording in progress. Are
Yep.
we in progress? You got the
Yeah,
thing?
I got it too. We're good.
Yeah. Because that's my number one fear is that we go to the trouble of, like get
Yeah.
meeting, we take your prep period and we're talking on YouTube or whatever, and then like the recording doesn't go through. That would be
Yeah.
very bad. So we're joined here today on the Pickcode YouTube channel by Adam. Adam, you teach somewhere in Colorado. Where in Colorado?
Yeah, I teach in Lakewood, which is one county west of Denver. So about 30 minutes from downtown Denver.
30 minutes from downtown Denver. Cool. Nice. Adam and I are both Tufts Jumbos, right?
Go
So
Bows.
that's the Go Bows. That's our shared connection. How did you end up in Colorado then? Because like you went to school in the Boston area.
Yeah. Well, my dad's family is from Colorado, and I grew up in New Jersey because my parents met in New York. So, long story short, after my dad retired from his job in New York, which is in like 2016 or so, the University of Colorado reached out to him and asked if he wanted to become a professor there in his retirement. So, not really a whole lot of retirement there, but he said yeah because he wanted to, go back to college. And so, my parents and my family all moved out here and then I worked in Boston for one and a half years after graduation. And then when I decided that I wanted to get out of the tech sector and back into education, I realized I probably couldn't stay in Cambridge on a education salary. So I decided to come back out here where it's not super cheap, but still a little bit cheaper, and I can teach and afford to pay rent still. So it worked out well because now I'm here with my family, and it's a beautiful and wonderful place to live.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you were working in tech then and switched.
Yes. Yeah. I worked for Amazon on Alexa for, I mean, I had an internship there on Alexa for about, 3 or 4 months. And then after I graduated, I was hired full time for about a year and a half working on they call the wake word team. So when you say the word Alexa, what's the software that runs that determines whether or not that is the word Alexa, wakes up or doesn't wake up as a result. And it's an interesting project, but it was kind of I found it to be boring at the end of the day. Like I wasn't really that engaged with the work that I was doing, which is maybe my fault. I don't know, but I definitely find teaching to be significantly more interesting, which I think is worth a lot for me.
I think we're kindred spirits in that regard, right? I worked in corporate jobs for a few years and then
Mhm.
I was like, were you a teaching assistant at Tufts?
No, I was not.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, so then how did you know that you wanted to do teaching as the alternative to engineering?
Well, I mean, my mom has was a teacher for my whole life growing up, so I was kind of in that space already. I sort of knew what the lifestyle was like, and found it to be an interesting option. I also just had a bunch of really good teachers when I was growing up. Like my math teachers in high school were really spectacular, which is kind of what got me to teaching math in the first place. Is that I felt really inspired by those people who taught me when I was growing up and wanted to help other students have the same connection with these kind of tricky subjects like math and computer science. And then after I graduated, I was doing some tutoring at the high school in Cambridge. And so that kind of affirmed for me that not only education was something that was interesting to me, but also that I like this age group of kind of teenagers and specifically older teenagers who can handle these more challenging ideas and who I can kind of talk to like adults. I worked in an elementary school when I first moved here, like fixing Chromebooks and stuff. And those kids are cute and sweet and stuff, but I couldn't really have authentic conversations with them. And I like working in a high school where obviously I'm still working with children, but they're more mature and I can sort of interact with them almost as if I would interact with a peer, which I really like.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. So you were doing the tutoring at CRLS here in
Yes.
Cambridge.
Yeah.
Were you doing like the volunteer tutoring thing?
hmm Yeah,
That's
I don't
interesting.
know. It was 2 days a week from 7 to 7:45 or something. It wasn't really anything crazy, but
That's funny. So
um,
my wife just started doing that because we live
yeah,
in Cambridge. We live actually really close to the high school. So will she ever get students to show up? Because so far this semester there hasn't been anyone showed up.
there. When I did it, I had one or two students who would routinely come in. And I mean, it's the same thing with the tutoring center that I have at this high school. Like, you get the regular suspects. Beyond that, to get a student to kind of choose to cut out time of their day, especially early in the morning to get tutoring is a little tricky. But yeah, I had some students eventually and some repeat customers. But part of the joy of teaching teenagers is you got to reckon with the fact that they really don't want to be there. And that comes with its own suite of challenges. But yeah, I imagine somebody will show up. I had a good time though. And I mean, it's so low like risk when you're tutoring. And it was just fun to kind of look at high school math problems again and remember all of that stuff. And I think it's really interesting to like help people understand things. Like there's obviously this big gap between you being able to do something and then you being able to get other people to have that same understanding. And I think that being able to close that gap is, um, of course, good for society, but also just like really fun. I think it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Well, you also did it a smart way though, because I had my short career teaching for a couple of years. I
Hmm.
dove right into it like full time as a job. Like
Yeah,
I quit an engineering job on Wednesday, and then on Monday I started being a
it's
teacher, like
wild.
in the
Yeah,
classroom, like with a
yeah.
Power School account. And yeah, I could have maybe gotten my feet wet with some tutoring or something like that.
Yeah, I did think that that slow introduction was helpful because especially with teaching where it's not like a corporate job, there's not a ladder to climb, you're dealing with other challenges. Like I think it's really important to ask yourself, do I actually want to do this before you do it? But
Yeah, I
um
mean, I jumped in. I didn't. My career did not last super long.
yeah,
But that's neither here nor there, I guess. So you mentioned you teach math. So
yes.
so you teach obviously some computer science. That's why we're
Mhm.
talking. But so what's your breakdown? What courses do you teach?
Well, so I'm a licensed math teacher. That's what my master's degree is in is secondary math education. In the state of Colorado, computer science is a subset of math. So for whatever reason, somebody who is allowed to teach math is also legally allowed by the state to teach computer science, which is why that door kind of opened for me. Um, my first year teaching, I only had one computer science class, and it was a section of about 15 students. So it was mostly geometry and algebra, and then a little sprinkling of computer science. The next year, I had a little bit more. The year after that, I had a little bit more. And now I teach all computer science except for one math class. So it's kind of been inverted at this point where the majority of the work that I do now is computer science, all the way from what we call the computer science foundations level, which is like the really basic, like what's a battery, what's a monitor, like how does code even work, all the way up
Oh,
to AP Computer Science Principles and the AP Cybersecurity class as well. So I've sort
got
of
it.
flipped. I used to be all math and now I'm all computer science.
So you're piloting the new AP
I
cybersecurity.
am indeed, yes.
Okay, got it. Because I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and people were talking about how that's a new
Mhm.
pilot.
It is, yeah. So this is now the second year that it's being taught. So last year there were about, I think they said about 25 schools across the country doing it. This year there are about 150. And then next year they're going to make it full-fledged and offer it to everybody who offers AP courses in general.
Got it. Okay, so switching a little bit into code,
Sure.
I don't know if the resolution of this video, I've had some frustrations with Zoom's export. I don't know if the resolution is high enough, but I'm reading the code that's on the back of behind your head,
Oh
and I'm
yeah, my
like,
little
super
C++ and
confused.
Python.
No, but
What'd you
yeah,
say?
because it's x equals float input of this. So that's Python code,
Yeah,
but
that's
underneath
Python
it
and
is
this is C++. Two separate conversations I was having with two separate students. Yeah. We were doing similar things actually. So in both of those situations, we're talking about converting binary or decimal numbers to binary numbers, which is a project I really like doing in almost all of my coding classes. But yeah, my lower level and my middle level, so my foundations and then my coding one class are both in Python. And then once we get to AP, we switch over to C++, which is fun because a lot of those students come from the coding one class. So they have that opportunity to practice translating algorithms instead of coming up with a binary algorithm from scratch. Now they already have a resource that they wrote the year before they can use. And they just have to figure out the syntax for translating it, which is what that C++ is like, just combining all of these nasty things in that gross C++ way. Whereas up at the top, Python, it's like a piece of cake to take in input and do
course,
stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah. No, that's really interesting. So what was I gonna say? So then, this is the Pickcode YouTube channel, so we have to talk about
Sure.
how you use Pickcode. So what were you using prior? Like, how did I think we chatted on LinkedIn because we
Mm-hmm.
like LinkedIn friends or something.
Yeah.
But what were you doing before? What are you doing now? Because if you have C++, maybe it's complicated. So like,
Yeah.
how are things
So
for you?
to kind of get the context for it, my first ever coding class was AP Computer Science A, so that's mandatory in Java. So I needed some sort of setup for that, and I've never really been a fan of web code editors. I just don't think that most of them do what I'm looking for, and they're kind of heavy-handed a lot of the time. So what I did for that Java course, which I now still do with the AP, is I basically spun up access to a server that's just running Linux that students access through a web browser. So the issue is that their Chromebooks couldn't SSH or they couldn't write code on their Chromebooks directly. So I basically emulated a terminal that had an SSH connection that I then posted publicly on the web so that students could access it through their computers. So long story short, students were using their Chromebooks to code directly onto another Linux computer. So they were not only learning the syntax, but they were also learning the Linux commands and the file system navigation and dealing with a headless server where you can't use your mouse or anything. So
So they
I
were
still do
coding in
that.
like Vim or something.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm a big Vim guy,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I have a lot of my students use Vim as well. The majority of them use Nano because it's a little bit less painful, but my more advanced students, I say switch over to Vim or switch over to Emacs. Like there's a whole world out
These
there for you to discover.
these students are true coders. They're not messing around.
Yeah, they are, and it's interesting. I mean, those text editors and navigating on a headless server like is just weird to begin with, but it doesn't take students very long to be comfortable with it, which is really nice. And then they get this benefit of having that whole additional suite of knowledge, and being able to navigate through a computer that doesn't have a screen. Maybe not for a high school coder, but when you get into real software development, that's quite a lot of what you're doing. So I enjoy teaching them that, and I think that they enjoy it as like a puzzle to solve. It also sort of makes them look cool when they're coding in the lunchroom and they're just typing text onto a weird looking screen.
Well,
But yeah,
so this is an advertisement for not Pickcode then of like
well, so yeah, there's definitely like I have different use cases for different things. Pickcode is really, really good for my lower level coding and for my medium level coding, the Python courses. I tend to start transitioning my Python students over to the server around the end of the year just so that they can get a hang of it and so that when they're looking at it in AP, it's not the first time they've seen it. But for a coding class where the goal is to learn how to code, um, I think that I want to prioritize just that. And Pickcode, I think, does a very, very good job at that. Because I created this server thing out of necessity because Google Colab and Replit and all of these other web text editors are super powerful, but they're just way too complicated and try to get students to do way more stuff than they need to do, or that they even need to know about at that point. And so I had them use the server because I was like, at least there, it's like a clean cut thing. You're just editing code in a text file. With Pickcode, I can essentially have them do the same thing where they're just looking at the text. It obviously pulls away the running of the commands in the Linux server and processing stuff with text files, stuff like that. But I think that for new students is good because then they don't have to get caught up in all of the Linux commands and all of the server management and all of that. But they're also not bogged down with all of the excessive kind of file management tools that something like Colab would produce. So Pickcode does what I was doing on the server, just without the Linux layer on top of it that they would have to get through, which is why I find it to be useful for these students who just need to know how to write a program, who maybe are not going to become professional computer scientists, but would need to interact with Python in some capacity at some point.
makes sense to me. So I mean, just FYI, we did add
Mm.
C++ this year.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw
I
that. I'm
know.
going to
So
try
like,
that.
if you ever like, because I'm totally with you, right? Like at some point you graduate from Pickcode. Like
Hmm.
Pickcode is not meant to, and like that's we never market it this way. We never
Yeah,
want people to think this. Like this is not your permanent place to. You're not going to do professional stuff here, and like
right.
eventually you're going to want to be advanced, and eventually like it is really cool. Students are interested. They want to learn how does this stuff work behind the scenes. But there is some of the niceties, right, of like the cloud collaboration or the
Right,
monitoring
exactly.
lessons and stuff like that. So that is an
Yeah, I
option for you to
I
bring
do
out at
think
some point. Yeah.
the collaboration is super valuable. I before was teaching students Git because I'm like, that's pretty much the only thing that exists to do that. And that's super hellish for students to try to learn in
Yeah,
high school. And
that's really
so
tough.
being able to say, oh, here's another solution that is more akin to Google Docs than like this weird thing that Git is trying to do. Like, again, my upper level students use Git and they know how to use it, at least to an extent that works for them. But now I don't have to teach Git to my Coding 1 students anymore, which is such a time saver because that's a real brain melter for a lot of them. And so it makes my life quite a bit easier.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, everyone I talk to, everyone is unique. Like a lot of folks have always used a web thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like some folks, they would do offline editing where they would have like Thonny or something like that, or like
Mm-hmm.
or PyCharm or Idle
Yeah.
or whatever. So you've been doing a cloud thing, but you made your own server. So not everyone does that, but
Yeah.
it's always interesting to see what folks have rolled together as the tools that they have built to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a necessity. I think that the state of computer science education is that a lot of schools want it, but they're not really, they don't have the knowledge to get it like to a place where it's effective in the way that we kind of need it to be. So a lot of people I know are doing that. They're sort of coming up with their own glued together solutions. My school district is catching up, but it's still like I'm going to keep using my own thing until you can get me something that's better. And I'm not expecting that to be next year or the year after. Like it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I will say, don't hold your breath on us
Yeah.
adding a terminal with Vim and everything like that.
Yeah.
You never say never, but almost never say never.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't want lower level students to have to learn Vim. Like, there's a benefit to it, of course, when you're writing code, but if you're just learning to write Python, it's going to be a lot easier to just be able to click through stuff and highlight stuff and copy paste stuff the way that you're used to. The benefit of a text editor like Vim or Emacs or something that lives on a headless server is only going to become clear way further on when you're writing larger stuff and you need to write more faster. So I think that for right now, like the way that Pickcode is, where the actual process of entering and modifying text is super intuitive, is exactly what I need and what my students need.
That's great. Well, so those are kind words. I do appreciate them. Now,
Sure.
what do you have in terms of, because like we're trying to figure out what we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have in terms of feedback or bug reports? We've talked through a few bug reports with
We
folks.
have, yeah.
And what are your like? Are there any nagging issues? Because I don't get a chance to talk to everyone all the
Yeah.
time. So this is probably the first time we've talked live since like August. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it'd be interesting to hear how things have gone and what would be improved.
Yeah, I mean, I think the software is good. By and large, it does what we need to do. And I will say, Pickcode does kind of the ground floor level stuff really well. It starts to feel like smaller tech company software as we scale up the problems. You know, when we were doing like Pygame last semester, there were bugs in there with the connection between the keyboard and what was being shown on the screen, which I know we talked about and were able to resolve. So to your credit, that got fixed. But like once we start to build up larger things, you can kind of see it work a little bit harder to render this stuff in a way that, for example, if you were to go to Pygame's official site and use their emulator, you wouldn't see that because they have more powerful servers, more funding, more developers, more experience. But I think none of that is overwhelmingly problematic. And I think also the rate that you all at Pickcode respond to and replicate and fix errors goes a really long way. Because I had two computer science foundations classes last semester. So I try the lab with the first period and I'd say, oh, Pygame is working kind of, oh, sorry, that's my bell.
I don't know.
Pygame is
Yeah.
working kind of weird here. Like what's going on? Like it's a little bit laggy. The input's not exactly right. And then I'd send you an email and I'd go to lunch and I'd come back and you'd have a response already there saying like, oh yeah, we see this in our logs. Here's some workaround that you can try. And then, 3, 4 hours later, when I see the next period, I could then say, okay, I heard back from these people at Pickcode about this error that we're having. I'm not sure that the error is totally fixed, but they've given me a workaround. which I think is really valuable. I mean, I don't have to tell you, like as a teacher, you're constantly just kind of making little adjustments to what goes on in the classroom. And to have somebody who's receptive to bug reports at that pace is really helpful for me and means that I can kind of get through what I need to get through without that many interruptions. If I were to email, a bug report to Google for Colab or something, I would not expect that to be looked at, much less fixed within a day.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. You did run into some, honestly, some nasty bugs at the beginning of the year. You were one of the
I'm glad that
you
we
were
did,
like
you
one of the
know?
unlucky people.
Mm-hmm. No,
But
I'm glad we did though, because I mean, not only for your product and your like management of it, just so you can get that feedback and so that I can be the person who finds them for you, but I think for students as well, like something that is a core tenet of a lot of these classes is like there's no such thing as perfect software. And we're kind of in this world where it sort of feels that way. Like everything is made to look really, really good and really, really strong. And to be in a class where we're learning about software development and to say, oh, yeah, like there's a bug right there with this software, I actually think is quite valuable for them. Um, that and the process of like documentation and replication and learning how to like phrase what's actually happening because so many students are just like, oh, it doesn't work, my Python's giving me an error. And when we see these bugs in real life, it's like, well, okay, but do you think if I just emailed this guy and said, hey, it doesn't work, like that would be helpful for him? No, we have to figure out what am I doing to cause this bug? When is it showing up? When is it not showing up so that we can all be working on the same team? So, bugs are annoying, but they're inevitable. And I think that it's helpful for students to see them and to realize that they're not expected to be perfect coders. Like everybody has these issues and everybody kind of learns from them and takes them in stride. And so I think, all things considered, it's a good learning tool for us all.
that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's a your mindset and attitude around this is very much appreciated. And like, you might deserve the award. Some people put in some pretty nice bug,
Yeah.
reports that are very easy to replicate and very easy to solve. But yours were pretty good. I remember, yeah, some nasty stuff around graphics and there
Yeah, it
was
was a
like
lot of the pie game stuff.
the pie game stuff was really tough when we rolled
Yeah.
it. It still says beta because we're not like fully
Yeah.
it works pretty well now, to our credit. But yeah, September, October, it was a
Mhm.
beta product,
Yeah.
for sure. So your patience with those bugs is by all means super appreciated because
Yeah.
I mean some people would just be like, nah, it doesn't work, like X the
Yeah.
window, just like rage quit.
Yeah.
But you're because like your feedback and giving us the specific things that happen to you, that's what allows us to get better and
Yeah.
everything. And the
Absolutely.
hope is, right, next September rolls around or October, November, whenever you do Pie Game again, it's going to work a lot better next
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, from what I've seen so far, like it seems like that's what I can come to expect.
Yeah. So I mean, that's at least the goal for us. So I have one last question, which is because you've done a lot of a great variety of things in Pickcode. What is the coolest thing that you've seen a student build in Pickcode? Or like best lesson that you ran or like coolest thing that happened?
Um, I think when I give assignments in Pickcode, with students in computer science in general, there tends to be like the students who really don't get it and the students who really do, and there's not too much in the middle, which is a big challenge with teaching computer science in general. But those students who really do get it are so empowered, and I don't know whether it's them or whether it's Pickcode or a combination, but they're very empowered to add on additional stuff. And a lot of the time when I give out assignments on Pickcode, because there's no overhead with compiling or disconnecting from servers or including libraries, like everything is sort of already there for them. It opens up the door for them in a lot of ways. So we did this Pygame lab, which it was just a ball drop lab, right? I had a ball coming from the top of the screen and a little paddle to come and hit the ball, whatever, stupid stuff. But those students who were able to complete that quickly were starting to add in all sorts of additional features, the bounciness of the ball, perhaps. I think I had a student who made like Pong. I don't remember if they made it go horizontally, but like where you have two paddles at the top bouncing the ball between them. Um, changing, stuff like it doesn't feel very cool, but or not cool is the wrong word. It doesn't feel very complicated maybe to me and you, but like changing the colors, customizing the game, where that's like an opportunity for a student to say, okay, I see what he's telling me to write and I can follow along, or I can dig a little bit deeper and see what I can customize in there. And for me, seeing a student follow that path and um, have the wiggle room and the confidence to change colors and change behavior because they're not overwhelmed by the interface, they're not overwhelmed by the libraries, is really it's exciting for me to see. And I think, like I said, a lot of that can be attributed to the student and maybe their previous experience with coding, or they're just their self confidence. But I also think that the way that Pickcode simplifies a lot of that stuff gives them the liberty to do that. Like, you're not going to make crazy changes if you feel like you're building this very delicate thing on this very delicate server. But because we know that not only is Pickcode relatively easy to use, it's clean enough, it has access to all of these libraries. You can undo your changes, you can save stuff in other places in a way that's very intuitive to them already. Like, I think it opens up creativity, and they start asking questions that they wouldn't in another space. So anytime a student kind of goes above what I'm asking them to do, I'm very excited about that. And I found when using Pickcode, a handful of my students would do that really regularly.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, couldn't put it better myself to some extent. I mean, it seems like we're on the same page. I mean,
Yeah.
our philosophy, right, is to create an environment where the students can be creative.
Hmm.
Our thing is not we give you 1,000 auto-graded lessons that are super boring and you type 2 + 2 = 4 and
Right.
you get a green check mark. Like, we will add auto-grading at some point, pretty soon, but overall, our goal is, yeah, to give out these, like, for teachers to be empowered to create assignments that are cool enough that the student is going to go and run with it and do their own creative
Yeah.
things. So, sounds like you're using Pickcode correctly as
Good. I'm glad
intended,
to hear that.
which is great. Cool. Well, I know you got to get back to class in a second. Any closing thoughts before we stop the recording here?
No, I mean, for people who are viewing this sort of thing, I think that it is probably worthwhile to hear from real teachers, and that it is a legitimately valuable piece of software. I think specifically because it does just enough without doing too much and without doing too little. So I think as far as this specific niche of teaching to code to new programmers, you guys have really hit the nail on the head. And I appreciate that from a teaching perspective and from somebody who's interacted with all of these other coding tools and teaching coding tools. Like, it's hard to find something that is right where you need it to be. And I think Pickcode does that. And I beg of you not to bloat it, stay right where you are and stay on the straight and narrow because you're doing a great job with it.
I appreciate it. Can I take that quote and post it somewhere?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
That was very eloquently said. So
Thank you.
and it's better coming from you than from
Yeah,
me. All right. Well, thanks a bunch, Adam, for
of
taking the
course.
time, and we'll stay in touch and hopefully send some good bug reports, but I hope they're not too
Yeah.
bad.
Cool.
All right. Sounds good. Cheers.
Thank you, Joe.